This weekend, the Basic Education Department is going to be consulting with role players in the sector about reopening schools during the lockdown. Equal Education says whatever the decision is, there is going to be unequal consequences. Unions want pupils to remain at home until the end of the COVID-19 peak, whenever that might be. Well, joining me now via Skype is Equal Education's co-head of research, Roné McFarlane, joining us here on eNCA. Roné, hello to you. Thank you for your time. This is the worst case of being stuck between a hard place and a rock. How do you begin to try and find a solution to this education issue?
Yeah, the reality is that many of the mistakes and failures of the past have really caught up with us in this moment and has resulted in us being unable to implement perfect solutions. There are no solutions in this moment to the education challenge that doesn't heighten inequality. And that's a huge indictment on our government and our society as a whole, that learners who are most vulnerable in this moment are likely the ones who are going to suffer the most, and we don't have the means to prevent that.
Roné, and this is what many people have been echoing even before lockdown. There is inequality in education. All that's happened during COVID is the spotlight has been put firmly on education and how unequal it is. So you say there is no ideal situation. So of all the scenarios, they're all bad. Is there a better of the bad solutions? Is there one that stands out?
What I mean. The reality is that this question of opening or closing schools in some ways is a false dichotomy, because we know that when schools reopen, not all schools reopen, because some of our worst off schools might not be ready to accommodate learners in a safe way. But we also know that when schools are closed, many wealthy schools continue to teach learners online while they are at home, while some learners are without any access to learning, haven't heard from their teachers, don't have access to learning material. And these are the stories that Equal Education has been hearing from our learner members, is that they have been finding the lockdown incredibly difficult, that they want to be back at school. Even learners who are scared say, you know, ideally they want to be back at school. And I think it's really important that learners' voices are also heard in this moment. Now, the unions have raised an important issue, which is that school reopening isn't just about school readiness. It's also about community transmission, and that there has to be some mechanism to respond to community transmission in a particular area. Now, the Department of Basic Education has actually developed a risk-adjusted strategy, which is supposed to be a strategy that guides, that feeds live information on community transmission and infections, and guides decisions about schools in a particular area. However, we were shocked to learn that the Department of Basic Education sees this entire system as a suggestion to provinces, but believes it can't enforce its implementation because of the concurrent competency of provinces and national government in making education decisions. So it seems like while it's developed this sophisticated model to respond to community transmission, this isn't actually being implemented.
Now, Roné, and is that where the problem is coming in? It does seem to be a plan from the Basic Department of Education, but it's not filtering down. Are you suggesting the Department of Education needs to make it statutory, it needs to be law, that this is the plan they're following and every school in the country must follow that? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, the National Department does have a mechanism through directives that it passes to enforce a certain level of compliance with certain processes and procedures. And it is surprising that if it's developed a sophisticated mechanism to respond to community transmission, that it isn't pursuing avenues to ensure that that mechanism is in place. You know, we're in a crisis, and we do need national government to be quite decisive in the leadership that it provides in this moment.
So as we start moving towards what many are considering in the models, Roné are suggesting that come September, especially in Gauteng, that is the peak. There is a call by some unions that the schools are closed. All the schools are closed, private and public, until after the peak. Is there an argument there? Could that at least satisfy the most unequal way of doing this?
Well, the reason why I bring up this risk-adjusted strategy is because it's likely that we will see different peaks peaks in different places at different times. And so while it might be necessary to close schools again in Gauteng at a certain time, that time for Limpopo or KZN might be at a different time. And so there has to be some flexibility in the response and in terms of the decisions that are made around closing schools. And I have to say, it's not... keeping schools open is not an easy thing, and it's having a tremendous effect on teachers especially. We know that a lot of teachers are old and have comorbidities, and while the department has allowed teachers to apply to stay at home, there's a lot of contestation around who gets to stay at home for health reasons and who doesn't. And teachers have to teach under incredibly difficult circumstances. And so, you know, it comes back to my original point that we have really failed our schools. We don't have mechanisms to support learners to learn at home, for instance. We don't have mechanisms to provide food for learners at home. We don't have mechanisms to provide psychosocial support to communities. And so it really puts schools in a very difficult place where teachers are almost supposed to or expected to be society's answer to all of these challenges. So the moment is really, really hard on teachers.
Roné, let's unpack this for me, if you could, for a moment, especially with the organization you work for, Equal Education. It's almost ironic because there isn't equal education in the country, yet that's what you're fighting for. You're suggesting, and I'm sure many will agree, private schools, because of the financial backing, have mechanisms. They have homeschooling, they have tutoring, etc. The public schools, they don't have access to that. Is this a case of because the public schools who don't have those facilities cannot get them, do we stop the private schools from teaching? Or are we at a point now, Roné, where we have to just look at this and go, if schools can do online teaching, carry on. The public schools that can't, we need to write off the academic year. Are we reaching that point in this road yet?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the consequences of underinvestment in the public system is very stark in this moment. Although there are some public schools who are allowed to charge school fees, who serve wealthier learners, and some of them have been able to cope fairly well with this moment. The implications for the academic year is definitely dire, and arguments that schools must open just to save the academic year are quite weak. The reality is that even where firstly, that we've missed a huge chunk of the school year already. Even where schools are open, we know that teaching and learning is happening under very difficult circumstances. Teachers or learners testing positives, schools having to reclose again, not all learners being at school at the same time, learners and teachers, carrying the psychosocial burden of this moment, and there not being a lot of psychosocial support available to support them. So really we must see this as a moment to provide some structure in schools for learners, to provide them with things like nutrition and an opportunity to have some routine, an opportunity to be meaningfully engaged. But to see this as a rush towards the end of the year to write exams and move on to the next grade, I think is really misunderstanding the moment. We have to see the government speak more explicitly about what its plans are in terms of the end of the year, what will be expected of learners, how will it deal with the backlog. And the reality is that it's likely that curriculum will be cut down, but also that some of it will have to be covered in the following year, and that there is just no way that we can expect learners to write exams at the end of the year, a high-stakes thing which either lets them stay behind this year or move on to the next year.
Roné, I'm sure we'll speak again because the implications for the matriculants trying to get into university is also a very, very important discussion to have. But for Roné McFarlane from Equal Education, I thank you for the moment in joining us. She is the co-head of research at Equal Education.